What's up? Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this very special live stream premiere that I am hosting on the one and only William Cooper, the late, great patriot. If you're here because you already know or have heard who Bill Cooper is or what he was about, then sit back and enjoy the ride. If you're just learning about this incredible patriot, and the incredible life that he lived, and how he went from being completely ensconced in a absolute pro-government, pro-military, pro-America family to one of the most incredible and outspoken whistleblowers to ever end up with a radio show. And I'm going to take you through a bit of that today. First of all, let me say this: Bill Cooper was this is a very exceptional human being, and I believe that he was chosen to see what he saw because he's one of the few people who would have the brass and the cojones to speak out. And don't get me wrong, he spoke out. They crushed his skull and they ran him off the road and he lost his leg, and they visited him. He was under mortal threat. And he said, I'm not going to, they said, are we going to have to finish the job or are you going to shut up? He did shut up. He did shut up. For 16 years, he shut up. He didn't say anything. But then, ironically and crazy enough, he was in a magazine store and he saw a magazine called, it was a UFO magazine. And so he had already been a witness to not only UFOs, but I'm going to tell you what he literally saw pass through his desk, because he had probably the most extensive clearance that you can attain as an intelligence officer, and he had it at the time in Naval Affairs. And Naval Affairs at that time was the hub. They had found a way to kind of outweigh the CIA, the FBI. They were the hub of all the major intelligence, particularly the intelligence about UFOs. So it's just unbelievable that he was in a position to see what he saw and then end up working in intelligence. But let me tell you, let me take you through a little bit about his family life, his legacy military family. They thought to serve the government was their patriotic duty, and they loved the government. Bill is Bill obviously has strayed very far from that. So I want to explain to you the security clearance he had so that you know that what I'm about to tell you is not the ravings, of just, me or even, but everything that Bill Cooper saw with his own eyes, he testified how and where he saw it. He was not one that ever operated off, well, this is, I heard this, the whistleblowers who the news tend to glorify are the ones who have secondhand knowledge, the ones who have been told, the ones who have been told about something someone else has seen. Bill Cooper was the opposite of that. Bill Cooper saw all these things with his own eyes. And that's why they never gave him, he had to form his own radio show, but they would not give him a microphone. CNN did a 3.5-hour interview with him. I don't think they aired any of it. I've been watching it. It's just unbelievable. I mean, it's obviously why they couldn't air any of it, but they did so many specials on him and John Lear. I don't know if you know who John Lear is. John Lear was the man, his father was the one who invented the Learjet. They're, again, a big military family. The shirt's rad. Thanks, Atlas. Where'd you get it? I got it from a place, I think it's called Magnolia Pearl. And I think it's in Roswell, ironically, synchronistically. It's in Roswell, Georgia. I'll double check that, but I'm pretty sure. So the security clearance that he had, right? He was given first he was given security clearance by Naval Security and Intelligence, which in and of itself would be a big deal. Then he was given a secondary NEC Naval clearance, which was coded 9545. And that means that he was an internal security specialist. And that is a position reserved for someone who protects classified information. So he went from one thing to a next level tier, and then he continued to graduate. So he had a specialty, which he was trained in. If you don't know the life and times of Bill Cooper, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how he came up into the world of intelligence. He was especially trained, right? And his job was the Pacific Area Intelligence briefings. So he was assigned to the commander-in-chief of the entire United States Pacific Fleet. And that admiral was Admiral Bernard Cleary at the time. And so Bill and like one other person, they were in charge. Like, this is all they did. They called it a fat cat job, right? Because I mean, you worked for hours, but all you did was compile and update information in real time for this man who was in charge of like the entire Pacific coast, right? I mean, he loved the job, but in order to have that job, he needed access to all the intelligence. Now, at the time, the level of compartmentalization that we see today was not quite in effect. In fact, I'm going to tell you the level of clearance that he got, which is insane they even called it this. So they were in charge of preparing briefings on everything that was happening on that half of the world, right? Because the commander of the United States Naval Forces needed to know everything that was happening. So they were in charge of doing that. So he ended up with was what they called top secret Q clearance, and he also was given an SCI attachment. SCI couldn't be more on the nose. It means sensitive, compartmentalized information. He was given a SCI attachment clearance with no blocks on his ability to research and reference anything in the databanks. This is extremely, extremely rare. And it probably only lasted for a short time while he was there, because they probably realized that they can't have someone who can cross-reference and access, right? Everything has become more compartmentalized. If you follow the disclosure movement or follow me close enough, then you know that, they don't even let the people know what they're working on who are sitting next to the other guys. That's how it is. If you saw Bob Lazar and what he talked about working underground in Area 51, you know that. But so this is crazy. He had sensitive, compartmentalized information clearance. Literally, he had an SCI attachment, which is wild, they would call it that. But this gave him access to things that most people in intelligence would never been able to come across. Everything was set up for Bill when he saw a gigantic UFO when he first entered the Navy. He was a trained observer, and he talks about this. He's like, we had to be able to tell our enemies from our allies so that we didn't kill anyone or blow anyone up. And he said, and I was, I'm very proud of the fact that I was trained. I know what I was seeing. So he saw this tremendous, he said he saw this UFO. It was like twice the size of a battleship. It was huge. And he saw it come out of the water and go into the sky. And he thought, great. He's the only one that saw it, right? Yeah, that's right, Polly. He did. He was the real deal. So he turned to his captain and he was like, and he said, when I said this to him, this is Bill's words, he said, the last thing I thought that my captain was going to turn in this direction with me and see the same thing. He said, but I didn't know what to say to him. I wasn't about to tell him I just saw a UFO, because that's one way to get, completely blacklisted and, people think you're crazy on the ship and you're not allowed to say that anyway. He said to his captain, he said, sir, I thought I saw something off the starboard side. Would you take a look with me? And he said, when they looked, and he said that actually a photographer came over as well. This thing, for almost 8 minutes, either it was the same ship, he said, or it was a different ship, but it came out of the water and down. And it was a transport. And he said it would move the water like Moses parting the sea. It didn't make a splash. It moved the water. He said the only splash came from after it descended, the water coming back into itself, which is, the details are remarkable. And he said the only words out of his captain's mouth were, why did this have to happen on my watch? Fuck, right? Which is hilarious. Like the details that he gives, you just can't make things up. And if you've heard Bill Cooper speak or you've read Behold a Pale Horse, his book, which I cannot recommend enough, I can't believe it took me so long to find that book and read it. It's called Behold a Pale Horse. It is his, I don't know what the word is, but if you want to understand what's happening, what's been happening, and what the plan is, you got to read Behold a Pale Horse. It is so good. It might be shocking to some of you. I gave it to my dad to read, and he was like, "Man, I'm halfway through this, and it's pretty shocking." He was like, "It's upsetting." I was like, "Yeah, well, that's because everyone's living in a fantasy, Dad." I said, "But this is the truth from someone who saw it." So, back to Bill, right? Bill was seeing things come across his desk that were so extraordinary. He was like, "This is crazy because no one is gonna, this is so far outside the realm of belief for Americans or anybody in this world that as he understood the world." He said that it was just, he didn't know what to do. There was no one to consider even telling because no one was going to believe him, what he was witnessing with his own eyes, right? Let's see, crushing it, brother. Thank you, Polly. I can't type down. Oh, you're driving. Be careful driving in a snowstorm, my friend. Thank you so much for tuning in. So he was able, because he had this incredible access, to read all the projects that were happening at the time that involved the UFO cover-up and disclosure. Now we call it the disclosure movement, but I'm talking about hundreds of projects. And he stated that when he first joined the Navy, he would go down to the bar and he would have a few drinks, and he said there was one or two guys down there, and after a few beers, they would talk about how their job was UFO crash retrieval. And he always thought that they were liars, that they were out of their minds, and he dismissed them. He figured they were hoping a girl was listening and were, trying to maybe get a free beer out of the deal. But after he saw the UFO and the way it was treated and handled by his superiors, he wished that he could go back and speak to those. Now, this is in the 50s and 60s. It is 2024, and they are still having congressional hearings as we speak, trying to convince Congress, trying to convince people that there is a UFO crash retrieval program. It is 2024. The program has been in existence for over 75 years, since 1947. Literally, that's how long we've had, this is the amount of conspiracy and cover-up that we are dealing with. It is insanity that they're still getting away with it, and they've done such a good job with their slandering psyop. Anybody who speaks about UFOs or extraterrestrials, they massacred them in the press for decades, and now you have people who they imagine to think that makes them somehow tinfoil hatter. Meanwhile, we're not alone. We've never been alone. We're not alone on this planet. We're not alone in this solar system, and we're certainly not alone in the universe. That is just insanity thinking. So he talked about everything that all the projects that he was reading about. Project Red Light, right? Which was the testing of extraterrestrial craft. He talked about Project Plato. Project Plato was a diplomatic project that came about when they started to have meetings with these species, with these races from other planets. And they did have those meetings, right? Project Pounce. That was what they called their first project. That was the ET recovery, the UFO crash recovery technology. And Project Pluto is the application of that technology to our own secret space program, which again has been in existence since 1951, unofficially. 1947, when we recovered the crafts that crashed at Roswell, which of course was real. I don't know if there's anyone who would be listening or tuning in or subscribed to my channel who doesn't know that Roswell was real. Most people don't know how many discs were brought down and crashed that same year, but there was, I think, 4 total over the course of that year, which lends weight to Dr. Stephen Greer's, statements that they were bringing them down. And I'll tell you when it started. It started way back in, it was Bill Cooper read about this as the files came through his desk. And he said the first time the US learned about it was in 1936 in Germany. Well, let me back that statement up. It was after the war. We went into, it was called, what the hell's the name of that? It starts with a P. Wait, let me think here. It started in Germany. We went in after the war, right? And we saw their attempts to replicate a UFO. Patumbe? No, not Patumbe. What the hell is the name of that place? But we found files. We found material. We found things that the Russians missed. And we took it. And we took some scientists. We wanted the technology. We wanted it really, really bad. Obviously, because Operation Paperclip. That's right. That's right, Walter. Thank you. Peenemünde. That's exactly right. My man. They found it in Peenemünde, which was where they had this staging ground. And the files told them that this disc was recovered in 1936. Now, they don't know how it was recovered. They don't know if it crashed. That information was never given to them, and they couldn't find it in the files that they recovered. But he said that's when the military-industrial complex, the one that Eisenhower warned us about, when it became its nightmarish manifestation that is still very much kicking and running this planet today, it was at this time because the richest oligarchs on the planet caught wind and they wanted in on this technology. They wanted to be able to hoard it. They wanted to be able to hide it. They wanted to be able to develop it and do with it what they wanted. And they did. And they used their pawns, the politicians, you know, the Bushes, these families, like the Rockefellers. They used them as gophers to hide these programs, to form NGOs around these programs, right? But let me go back to this chronology that I've laid out for you guys here, right? Because this is crazy. William Cooper talks about Project Grudge. Now, some of you have heard of like Project Bluebeam, right? That's the fake alien invasion that they've been, you know, prepping to stage for, I don't know, probably 60, 70 years now. But Bill Cooper read the files on Project Grudge. In fact, he read the files, he's one of only two people I know, and only one alive, Danny Sheehan, the lawyer, that read all the Project Blue Book files, saw all the pictures. And unlike Danny Sheehan, who saw them after the fact, Bill Cooper saw them in real time as they were being investigated. They were then handed to Hynek, to J. Allen Hynek, the famous scientist who was put in charge of Project Blue Book, which was a government program designed to squelch and nullify and discredit all information coming out about UFOs. But even Professor Hynek couldn't do that because there was a certain number of cases that could not be explained away, which was fascinating that, you know, they put him in charge to be a debunker, and he couldn't even do his job completely because these cases, some of them were very, very real. And Bill Cooper read about these cases, right? So Project Grudge, according to Bill Cooper, was transferred to Project Aquarius. That name probably sounds familiar to some of you who have been down a few rabbit holes of your own. But Project Aquarius, it got a lot of notoriety because documents came out after a Freedom of Information Act. They were very controversial. Half the people believing they were fraud, other people believing they were deliberate government misinformation, disinformation being put out, which is what Bill Cooper ended up believing. But he knew that he read about Project Aquarius while it was, you know, in motion, while it was an actual project. And he said their job detailed all the knowledge gained from the meetings they've had with ET races and from all the technology that they were able to recover, all the tests. So it was a total data bank. Project Aquarius was in charge of like the record books of what they learned about Earth, about humans, from these other beings, from these other species that they were meeting. And they learned a lot. And of course they said, well, we can't tell the public that, because what's everyone going to think about, you know, going to church on Sunday and paying taxes if if they find out that, you know, we're not alone and we didn't get here the way we think we got here. We are an evolutionary fluke, and God didn't create us in 7 days. No, actually, we're a hybrid race of about 22 interstellar, intergalactic, interdimensional, highly evolved beings who came together with a grand experiment, a grand idea, to create a race that had the best genes of all of them. And taking some of the indigenous DNA on this planet and mixing it with all of theirs, they created us, which is why we're so cool and why we're so special. And then we could get into why we're so emotional. That's another story. But imagine if that truth came out, the government would have a lot of trouble containing the excitement, right? And then it would become a question of, oh, how comes their ships move through space so easy with no gasoline, with no energy propellant, right? Yeah, we could get into that towards the end of this broadcast. But so what I love about Bill is he read and was privy to all the files, all the documentation. He saw video, he saw pictures, he saw all the things that were written about the Roswell crash, right? Yeah, it was Peenemünde. That's the name of the staging area in Germany that we first found the replicated UFO, right? So in 1947, we didn't have to try to play with the Germans' leftovers. We got our own stuff, right? The first crash, a disc exploded over the desert in Nevada, also known as the infamous Roswell incident, right? And I say exploded because it was found in pieces, right? And these teams, they set out, which is more credence to the fact that I think that they say there was a thunderstorm, but I have a feeling that a thunderstorm wouldn't be able to bring down one of these really incredibly advanced craft. You know, I got a feeling that they're prepared for things like thunderstorms. I got a feeling that, and I think that Dr. Greer is right when he says that we found a way to bring them down finally, because we did. But listen to this. This gets crazy, right? I can't even imagine being able to see all this happening and just know that this is your job every day, is to read files like this is what the United States government's doing. It's nuts. But so they scoured the area, they collected every speck of debris, right? They put, the first headlines ran, which were the truth, of course, about the flying disc that crashed. And then the next day, oh, it was a weather balloon. You know, they did their little cleanup propaganda. And people were like, oh, it wasn't a flying disc, it was a weather balloon. And of course the public was like, you know, thank you, Walter. Awesome show, he said. Thank you. You know, the headlines that they ran were accurate. You could, you know, there was people in Roswell who saw it, you know, because when that first thing crashed, they found bodies, and they thought that they were the bodies of children because they were so small. So you have first responders who were on the scene, people who called for help, the morticians who saw the bodies, and they said they quickly realized that they were not children, that they were full grown, they were small humans, humanoids, you know, that's what they look like. But so this is crazy because they found, right, walking through the desert, a survivor, and they named him EB, extraterrestrial biological entity, EB for short, right? And he was brought to Los Alamos. You know, they captured him, they brought him to Los Alamos. They had to put him in according to what Bill Cooper states that he read, and the reports and the pictures that he saw, that they put E.B. in a Faraday cage because his telepathy was interrupted by that. He could communicate with people, with his mind, and they knew that as soon as they took him in. And they were scared that he would be able to send a signal and tell, his compatriots where he was. And they weren't ready to give him up. They wanted to study him. They wanted to learn from him. And there's a lot of stories that have gone around about E.B. But this is one you probably have not heard, unless you follow me really closely, maybe on Instagram. You saw a post or two. But so they brought him. He was held captive, right? And he was in a Faraday cage, which prevented him from using his telepathy, which they were just scared of. They gave him company, which I'm going to tell you about. But he apparently, Bill read that he had the ability to walk through walls, and that he wore this ability on a technological device on his belt that they had to take from him, which would make sense considering UFOs can go through water. They seem to disappear. They go interdimensional or transluminal, however you want to describe. They're phasing out of three-dimensional reality. It would make sense that he can too. So that was huge, right? And what happened was, and this is probably the next milestone that Bill talks about, was E.B. a few years later became ill. He became sick. And they didn't know how to save him. They had assigned a naval officer. Wait, it was an Air Forceman? But so they were trying to save his life. And so what they did was, they had no idea how to treat him. And apparently he could not tell them anymore. At that point, he was so sick. So in an attempt to save him, they sent a signal out. They began broadcasting to space, asking for help, saying, "We have one of yours. We need your help to save him. We don't know how to save him." They knew they were broadcasting to a technologically superior race, and so they thought, we can make friendly contact, and the aliens would believe we're benevolent. They would be foolish, but they're going to believe that, if we broadcast like this. And the message was very specific. And they were hoping that, maybe they would show up and be able to maybe give them more technology. I'm sure they had a lot of plans. But as it happens, E.B. did not survive, right? So in June of 1952, according to Bill Cooper, at the time of E.B.'s death, there was no answer to the messages that were broadcast into space, right? And ironically and incredibly, what came from that story is a movie called E.T. And those of you who are my age or older probably remember E.T. It was a very touching movie. It was a very good movie. I think Spielberg directed it. And I always knew that Spielberg had connections to the intelligence agencies because, of course, Hollywood and the intelligence agencies are like this. Hello. But now it really makes sense to me, okay? Because E.T. was this story of E.T. They changed things to make it more palatable to the public. Like in the beginning of the story, he's running around in the desert and he's lost and the government's chasing him. Well, all that is true. In the real story, the government caught him, and in the movie, the boy finds him, right? I mean, this crazy enough, this relationship that this boy forms with E.T. is the relationship that this officer who was assigned to E.B. day and night, they knew that, they figured out that he needed a companion, that he needed someone to talk to him, and they wanted someone to be able to talk to him, make friends with him, and get information from him. So they assigned this guy to him. He was an Air Force officer, and they became really close because the Air Force officer wasn't allowed to leave, and so it was him and E.B. all the time. As far as I understand it, morning and night, this dude was assigned to E.B. and they became close, so close that when E.B. died, this Air Forceman officer, he wept. He was that upset, you know, because they had become friends and they had formed a symbiotic relationship. And it's just, that's the story of E.T. and the boy, right? It's nuts. So, you know, obviously in the movie, he gets ill, just like in real life. But in real life, he died. And in the movie, you know, he lives. It's a happy ending. Yay. But what is the government doing? The government is psychologically allowing stories to come out to the public so that when and if, I should say when, not if, the truth comes out about everything they've been hiding, it is not so psychologically jarring, you know, or hard to believe. It's something that people can understand. And the media in Hollywood has been tailor-made for that, much to the chagrin of everyone who thinks that, you know, this is an entertainment industry. It's much more than that. Anyway, let me fix that real quick. So, E.T. Phone Home was, according to a man who was right there and witnessed it, Project Sigma's attempt to make communications with the ETs to come help save the life of this captive ET that they found wandering in the desert. E.T. Phone Home was a true story. It's called Project Sigma, S-I-G-M-A. Crazy, right? Crazy, crazy. So again, this was a very exciting time to be in intelligence. In 1953, we detected large objects in space coming toward Earth. Now, Bill Cooper was seeing these reports in real time because, remember, my friends, it was the Navy's job to do this. That's why, like, some of the ships, you know, the Navy has just always been the hub for this. They're kind of our first responders in war and everything. You know, it was the German Navy that created the submarines and also the UFOs. Anyway, it's very much like this is where this stuff lives, right? So in 1953, they detected large objects in space coming toward Earth in a high orbit around the equator, right? And objects were quickly determined to be big spacecraft, okay? Intelligently controlled. They established communication with these spacecraft, right? And they made arrangements to land. Now, this was the first time this took place. There were 3 landings that Bill Cooper said that he knows for a fact, verified, vetted, and confirmed happened. He said the first one was, let me see, 1954, and that one took place at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. There was another one at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and he said that these he knows for a fact happened. That's where these landings happened. He said the only one that he was not able to verify for a fact with his own, you know, by himself, was the one that he believed was at Homestead Air Force Base in Florida, right? And the first meeting that was recorded, and this goes with a lot of theory and a lot of, you know, if you study these events and you listen to all these speakers and you've read the books, and then you've heard about this. You've caught wind of this because echoes of it have traveled through the years, you know, and are still happening. People are still talking about these meetings. But at that first meeting, they met with, see, I always was told that they met with either Truman or Eisenhower, but not at the first meeting. At the first meeting, they met with, they were intelligence officers. And they basically offered spiritual guidance and aid to the human race. And it was turned down. In case you didn't know, it was turned down. That should come as no surprise, really, to anyone who's looking out and seeing what the world is like right now. But, you know, we wanted technology. They weren't willing to give it to us. They wanted us to disarm our weapons of mass destruction. They wanted America to lead the way in that. And of course, America wasn't interested in that. We were interested in technology. And so nothing with that race, sadly, ever came to pass. The other two landings, which Bill says he knows for a fact happened, one at the Holloman Air Force Base and one at Edwards Air Force Base. They met with intelligence officers and they reached a basic agreement after several hours. This agreement, this was with the other beings. The spiritual beings we turned away. Obviously, we don't need, we're good. Spiritually, we're good. Everything is fine here. Welcome to Earth, Give me all your money. It's just so sad, man. So sad that we turned away the good ones and we welcomed I'm going to tell you, the ones we welcomed weren't benevolent. The first ones sounded like they were. They didn't come, in offering exchanges for crazy deals. But this second group of beings, they left one hostage with the officers, and his name was Krill. And they pledged they would return to him and formalize an agreement, which was going to be a trade. And in 1954, they landed again at Edwards Air Force Base. This time, President Eisenhower arranged to be on vacation in Palm Springs at the time so that he could be the speaker at this meeting. And it was like, at this time, when it came down, Eisenhower was whisked away and disappeared. And in fact, if you look at the headlines of that time, the press was in an uproar because Eisenhower literally disappeared. And they were like, the president's missing. Everyone was going apeshit. But really, he was taken to this meeting. And then they said that he was no big deal. He was taken to a dentist for a toothache. But no dentist has ever copped to treating Eisenhower for a toothache in anyone's investigations over the years. And that's because he was, in fact, at Edwards Air Force Base, right? He reached, according to Bill Cooper, who read the documents, a formal agreement with the ETs, and a treaty was signed, okay? And this treaty played out in the movie that you know as Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Another fantastic, classic movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Remember that movie? And that movie, the abductions, everything that you saw in that movie, except for finding the ship in the desert, and the planes in Mexico and those type of things, everything else in that movie was true. People were being abducted, okay? People were being picked up. And that was part of the deal. They traded technology, microchips, all the things that have become the technological hydra that is today's beast. And it is a beast, and it is dangerous, more so than most people understand or could believe. The technology I'm using to talk to you right now is a Trojan horse, literally. In many ways, it is exactly that, and they're just starting to utilize it, sadly. But obviously it's been working. I mean, were you guys here for 2020, 2021? Did you see that shit show? Everyone stayed in because they said stay in. It was wild. It's crazy. Anyway, to finish this story here, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, just like E.T., was based off real intelligence, real projects, and the deal was made. And they allowed this race, which I came later to learn was a race of grays, the ones that are most typically seen, with the big eyes, to abduct X amount of people annually. Now listen to me. In case you've been living on the moon or just solely deep-throating government propaganda, there's been, I don't know, like tens and tens and tens and tens of hundreds of thousands of cases reported of people being abducted. And there's a 90 to 95% through line in all of their experiences about being probed, about being taken to a ship, So the deal was, you take X amount, and in exchange you give us technology. And they promised to put those people back They promised that those people wouldn't remember anything and they would be unharmed. And guess what? They didn't keep their promise because they were not exactly, benevolent. They were a race that was desperately trying to save their own population, their own race, and they needed and they wanted to harvest human DNA to do it. And I learned after, not from Bill, that that there were other races that heard about this treaty and came down and took advantage. They were just like, oh, they're just going to blame them, and they were abducting people too, which is crazy, but we live in a universe of free will, so it makes sense that there's going to be, some bad actors out there, just like there are here on Earth. How could we imagine that, God willing, other beings from other planets are far more evolved than this human race? Or else we probably wouldn't even be here by now. They probably would have just blown us off the map, but, excuse me. So that is the story of Eisenhower. Now listen, Bill Cooper is an avid reader. I don't know of anyone, besides possibly David Icke, but David's knowledge is much broader, whereas Bill Cooper really dove in and became a specialist on secret societies because he saw, and he says it all the time, he's like, listen, it's not the government that is destroying this nation, that is destroying this planet. It is these few select people, and they all have a few things in common. They come from secret societies. They're good at keeping secrets. They have their own ideas about what this world should be like, and they're willing to do just about anything to get it. And Bill Cooper, it was very empathic. He was like, I understand some of their ideas aren't bad. Wouldn't it be great if we could all live in peace under one world? Yeah. He said, but if you have to kill 2 billion people to create a peaceful planet, are you not just becoming the absolute thing that you think you're preventing? Literally? He said, and that's what they are. That's what they do. They have these incredible justifications that they believe in, that they're doing this service for the world. And then we see that. And then he talked about, biological weapons. He talked about tracking and microchipping. He talked about the program that put microchips in dogs and how, he's like, they're going to put a satellite in space so they could track dogs. He's like, they were practicing for the humans. Hello? And I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Damn it. The biological weapon program you covered has been so eye-opening. Thank you, Marina. Good to see you, my friend. But man, if you want to deep dive into secret societies and into, how they've been used over the years to put and infiltrate government and what the plan is, because the plan is simple. Everything in motion is about a one world totalitarian government that is socialist for all intents and purposes. Which, if you take a look at China, you get like a little snapshot of it. It's going to be great for the people running the show, but they don't see us as their equals. They don't see us as humans. They're indoctrinated into the belief that we are cattle. And Bill Cooper's biggest criticism of our human race is that we act like cattle. And sadly, he has a good point. He speaks in the beginning of his book, he says, if you are not intelligent enough to use your mind, then you are no better or different than an animal. And he said, that is what the American population has become. And he speaks of the Constitution. He speaks of the power of it, and that America's identity lives in the Constitution, not even in the people, in its Constitution. And he said, and most of you don't even know what the Constitution says. How can you protect your rights when you don't know what they are? He said, do you think it's a coincidence that the Rockefellers took the Constitution out of the education programs? He said, it's not. It's a complete dumbing down. And man, they've been so good at it. It's insanity. If you want to learn about your rights, you have to go out of your way. You have to go out of your way to find out what they are. And he said the only thing keeping them from declaring martial law to this day, he said, is the Second Amendment. He said, so they're going to do everything they can. They're going to make you beg them to take the guns. He said, and don't you fall for it. No matter what they put on the news, no matter what they say, because the moment they get the guns is the moment we're done in the water, right? And I believe that. I believe that wholeheartedly because there's just too many of us. Even with a population of 335 million, which, by the way, is low if you look at our peers in other countries like India and China, who do not even have the economic infrastructure that we have, except their government hasn't been releasing biological weapons, putting poison in the food and the air, and, knocking people off by the tens of millions for so many decades. So that's how their populations got to be so big. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. Open brain, brain painful, heart open, and saddened at times. Keep walking. Yeah, I get that a lot, Flicks, with what I talk about. I get that a lot, especially from my wiser audience. But I always commend you guys because it's hard to hear information like this. Most people don't have the stomach for it. My dad couldn't finish Bill's book. He never finished it. He couldn't finish it. It was too hard for him to read about the country that he loved. It was too much of a shock. And he didn't want to swallow it. It's a tough pill to swallow. But once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? And it's important to know the truth. But I'm encouraging you all, I have 5 or 6 of Bill Cooper's lectures. Thank you, Marina. I appreciate that. You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. So I've been watching all his lectures, man, and he was just so sincere. And of course, they killed him. You guys, they gunned him down outside of his house. So after the 2 attempts on his life, crippled him, crashed his skull, broke his skull, and he had lost his leg in the second accident. And he said, they visited me. He said, they made it very clear. They said, are you going to shut up or are we going to finish the job? And he said, I'm going to shut up. Of course, he said, I'm going to shut up. And for 16 years, he did. But then eventually he decided that he saw what they were doing with the UFOs, and he became more concerned about the fate of this human race and this country than he did about himself. And he said, I just thought I got to get in front of the public and stay in front of the public. That's my best shot at staying alive. So he did he spent his entire savings and did a mailing to everyone around. He just found address packets and he shipped all the information he had around the world. And people were like, who the hell is Bill Cooper? And is this true? It was a crazy, dead man switch. Because he thought, if they come after me, this information has to live. What I have seen with my own eyes has to live. And he put it out, man. God bless him. He put it out. He started a radio show. He was giving talks before people gave talks like this. He was trying to wake people up. And in this last documentary I saw, there's probably 25 people in his audience, and they're recording it. And he says to them, he says, this is suicide for me. He said, those were his exact words. He said, if I thought for a moment, he said, because they were like, how do you do this? He was like, listen, I may be the one leading the charge, but he said, I know that you'll catch up to me. He said, because I know what's in the heart of Americans. And he said, and we're always there for each other when we need to be. And then he said, if I thought that you guys weren't going to pick up this torch when they take me out, I wouldn't be here. He said, because this is a suicide mission. And he was right. It is, and it was for him. Because in 2001, in June, he had formed a civilian intelligence network agency. And he was gathering information, and he had a lot of sources. And so it was June, and I have this on tape. The name of his radio show was, I think, The Hour of Our Time. I don't know if Walter's still listening. He probably remembers. The Hour of Our Time. And Bill Clinton, this tells you what a hero Bill Cooper was. Bill Clinton called Bill Cooper's radio show the biggest threat to democracy to ever hit the air. Ha ha! That's how you know he was onto something. If Clinton was trying to discredit him and calling him a threat, then obviously he was onto the corruption, because ain't too many people more corrupt than Billy and his wife. Billy Clinton, not Bill Cooper. Anyway, June of 2001, Bill Cooper went on the radio, and I have this recording. You cannot take it away because it has been immortalized. It was on the air. It broadcast into, I think it was FM at the time, maybe AM, I don't know. But it was broadcast. Therefore, it was recorded. And he said, and I quote, because he found out CNN had been taken with the CIA to interview Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. And of course, he knew damn well that Osama bin Laden is on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. He's a quote terrorist. So he said, just so you know, the United States and Israel are planning a massive attack. And they're going to blame Osama bin Laden. And whether that attack comes on the United States or Israel, I don't know. But they are planning it, and they are going to blame Osama bin Laden because they just got back from shooting an interview with him, the CIA and CNN. He said, so when they say it, don't you believe it. He was dead by October of 2001. He was shot outside of his house, sadly. Yeah, I'm gonna upload the recording. Marina, I'm gonna upload the recording. But yeah, that's right, The Hour of Our Time. Thank you, Ostrand. And that was the end of Bill. And they tied him up. I just found out from my friend that they tied up his videos. They made it impossible for him to be distributing them. I find copies of them on eBay. Somebody's burning DVDs in their basement, God bless them. And they have 6 or 7 of Bill's interviews still alive and well. I just watched the first half of his interview with CNN. Even his interview with CNN, which of course they never aired, is mind-blowing. It's just, you cannot speak from a place of such truth unless you have seen it with your own eyes. And take it from me, I was an actor for 20 years, and I know what it's like to take information that is not yours and not true and try and make it true. It's glaring when people do that, even the best of them. You could just tell they're full of shit. But anyway, God bless Bill Cooper, and God bless you guys. And I think that we can all be inspired by what Bill gave his life for, what Bill dedicated himself to. And that is sharing information, forming communities, and sticking together, because in case you haven't noticed, the government is not here for us. We have to be here for each other. And, it's so important that we understand that in days to come, because things are probably going to get worse before they get better. God willing, they get better soon, though. No, they never have been, man. They really, I don't know if they ever have been. But that's what I got for you guys. That sums it up, And I'm still collecting Bill Cooper's information and lectures, and every time I find one, I learn more about what's been hidden. I want to tell you guys about my new Patreon page. We're forming our own community, and we're using Patreon because we can post things there that will remain uncensored, unlike YouTube. And also, we wanted to create a system so that you guys have more access to me if you would like it. And so we have some cool tiers set up that offer different things. So I encourage you guys to check that out. There's a link to it in the video description. That's new. We just launched that. And we're going to keep our unedited versions of our podcast on Patreon as well. can we get your shirt if we've joined? Listen, you can't, I don't know if you can get this shirt, but you can get awesome Far Out with Faust merchandise, which will be custom designed for this one tier group that we have. And like, we have some really great ideas. We're looking forward to really surprising people with these gifts that we're going to create for them, personalized gifts with the Far Out with Faust logo and all that. So if you like this broadcast, if you happen to be new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe. You know, we struggle to grow because I've been banned from advertising our podcast across most platforms. Of course, I didn't get a reason, but you know, when I advertise my podcast, they do well. You know, I know how to target my audience, and so it's hurt since they banned me from advertising. But you know, we know we can overcome the algorithmic suppression, and hopefully, you know, not that we're going to count on anything. You know, Trump maybe can change some of the laws so there's slightly less censorship than there is now, but we're not going to depend on that. I love you guys. I appreciate you taking the time and listening to me. I enjoy collecting this information and sharing it. I'm so glad that I had such an awesome audience and with me here. Much love to you guys. Have a great weekend wherever you are. And don't forget to subscribe. Check out the Patreon page. And much love to all of you. Thank you so much.